Hi, good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, July 19th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Maryland Department of Health's Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the DDA Self-Directed Services Updates webinar. And on the panel today, we have Christy Colbreth. She's the statewide coordinator of self-directed services, and we have Nick Burton, director of programs. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to hear the webinar, by computer and by phone. If you look at the panel interface on your right labeled audio, you can click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. We will be recording the webinar and posting the session on YouTube and the DDA website. Today's PowerPoint has also been uploaded as an attachment and is available for you to download in the webinar panel box. If you're listening by phone, you can request that that be emailed. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and we'll get to those towards the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce Christy Colbreth. Hi, Christy. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you, Donna. We can go to the next slide. Good morning, everybody. Today we'll be reviewing updates and guidance to support broker services. I'll be sharing some support broker tools as well. We'll first go through an overview of support broker services, and then we'll go through the process of planning and budgeting for a support broker. Support brokers will be required for some people who self-direct their services, so we will review who those folks are and how support brokers can support them. And next, we'll review the qualifications a support broker must have and the requirements they must meet. Support brokers can either be employees or vendors, so we'll review the differences between the two. The DDA waivers allow for initial onboarding and orientation, what we have called support broker startup historically. So we'll review some updates to that. And there will also be a time for questions at the end of the webinar. However, person-specific questions should be directed to the regional office SDS lead. Additionally, if you have any questions regarding non-payment or any other FMCS concerns, please connect with your FMCS and follow their process. Next slide. Now we'll do an overview of support broker services. So what are support broker services? Support broker services are a waiver service in each of the DDA's waivers. A support broker is a person who works at the direction of and for the benefit of a person who self-directs their services. They can either be an employee or a vendor, and they are required for people who hire relatives, legally responsible people, representative payees, or guardians. Next slide. At the direction of the person, support brokers may assist the person in defining goals, needs, and preferences, making informed decisions in arranging, directing, and managing services, including personnel requirements and resources, development of emergency plans, identifying and assessing and managing supports, services, and resources, independent advocacy to assist in filing grievances and complaints, and understanding the responsibilities involved with self-direction, both with quality assurance and oversight and avoiding conflicts of interest. Now, in this slide that you'll have today as an attachment, I hope, if you don't, we'll make sure that gets emailed to you. There's a link to a chart with the roles of a support broker, additionally a CCS, and a day-to-day administrator, and what those three people in your team can do for you. Next slide. Planning and budgeting for a support broker. Support broker services are offered in the 3 home and community-based services waivers that are operated by the DDA. People may be approved for up to 4 hours of support services per month of a plan year in their PCP. So that's how people budget. So people can plan for up to 4 in their PCP, and that funding will be available for up to 4. So the best practices here would be to write a job description for your support broker and share it with your CCS and other team members. They show what goals your support broker can help you with, and they show how your support broker will work for you in the year. Teams can also consider writing a service implementation plan, or SIP, to show the role of their support broker, or even use a participant agreement to discuss and note how their support broker will support them in their PCP. Next slide. Now, budgeting for a support broker. You may choose to budget for more support broker hours per month by using cost savings from other services or unallocated funds. Cost savings is the funding that is available in a self-directed budget after the person's identified needs in their person-centered plan have been met. Cost savings includes funds that are not spent in the person's budget and any unallocated funds from the budget allocation. Using the self-directed budget sheet, you may choose to budget for up to 30 hours per month by using cost savings from other services or unallocated funds. Using a budget modification, you may move funding for up to 30 hours per month of support broker services from other services to support broker at any time. Next slide. When is a support broker required? A support broker is required when you hire relatives, legally responsible people, representative payees, or guardians. Now, please note, support broker services will not be required in these circumstances until the person's next PCP annual plan, or their annual plan date, or July 1st, 2024, whichever is later. Now, keep in mind that we do want people to consider adding that at their next plan if they're able to. So if you're able to add that support broker service when you know it will be required while you're planning, please go ahead and do that. But the requirement will be July 1st, 2024, or the annual plan date. Next slide. When support brokers are required, support brokers must not be a relative, legally responsible person, representative payee, or legal guardian. They must be included as a team member in the self-directed services participant agreement. They will work to reduce conflicts of interest and provide oversight and quality assurance. Next slide. So what might that quality assurance look like? When support broker services are required, the support broker should attend the PCP annual planning meetings, check in with the person quarterly, either in person, over the phone, or virtually, and the support broker should receive completed copies of the person's PCP and self-directed budget sheet. Next slide. Support brokers must meet all qualifications and requirements in the DDA waiver program application at the time of service in order to receive payment from a participant's self-directed budget. People self-directing may also require additional qualifications or training outside of what is required in the waiver. So let's review some of those requirements now. There is first the support broker certification. So support brokers must attend a class and pass a qualifying exam, and those certificates are valid for 2 years. Donna, who is facilitating our call, often runs those trainings, and they're happening very frequently. Support brokers are also required to have first aid and CPR and any other required training that the person has. So in regards to first aid and CPR certifications, after July 1st, when these certifications expire, support brokers must attend first aid and CPR training in person or through a hybrid model. Support brokers must also maintain any training and certificates that are required by the person they work for. Now, cleared background check. All support brokers must have a criminal background check completed before working for any person. And then Child Protective Services background checks are required for support brokers who work for anyone under the age of 18. Support brokers are also required to work within the scope of the service that's listed in our waiver, policy, and guidance. And they are to maintain accurate records. So support brokers must maintain accurate records by tracking, logging, and reporting services rendered by the quarter hour. Next slide. Now, let's review the differences between employees and vendors. People self-directing their services choose the support broker either as an employee or a vendor. When the person chooses an employee, the employer chooses the hours, wage, and benefits for that support broker employee. New hire paperwork is required for each person that support broker employee works for. They must have a completed background check for each person they work for that is run by the FMCS and paid for by the FMCS. And then the person with the support of their team approves the timesheets that are submitted by the support broker employee on a biweekly calendar using the FMCS electronic timekeeping system. And taxes are withheld from support broker employee paychecks in accordance with the employee's tax withholding paperwork. Support broker vendors choose to contract support broker services to people instead of being hired by them directly as an employee. The vendor rate for the support broker service is negotiated between the person and the support broker vendor. Support broker vendors must work with the person's FMCS agency to ensure all vendor paperwork is completed and turned in before they can be paid for support broker services they provide to a person. This may include vendor onboarding forms required by the person's FMCS. Support broker vendors must present results of a criminal background check to the person and the FMCS. Support broker vendors are responsible for conducting and paying for the required background checks. Federal background checks can be completed by a private entity of the support broker vendor's choosing, and results of that federal background check should be no more than 365 days old at the time of submission to the FMCS. CPS background checks must be completed by the support broker vendor, with those results being routed to the person's FMCS. Each FMCS agency may help support broker vendors complete the CPS background check correctly. And as a vendor, the cost associated with these background checks is considered a business expense and is paid by the vendor. Support broker vendors working for more than one person may use the results of one background check to meet this requirement. So I'll say that again because I think that's important. Support broker vendors working for more than one person may use the results of one background check to meet this requirement. Support broker vendors should ensure that a background check is on file with all FMCS agencies that they support for the people they work for. And as with all vendors, taxes are not withheld from support broker vendors. Next slide. Now, we're going to review support broker vendor invoices. So, invoices should be submitted at least monthly, and they must include the name of the person and the support broker, the mailing address of the support broker or support broker agency, the days in which the support broker services were provided, and the total hours calculated by the quarter hour and amount charged, along with the signature of the support broker. Invoices must always be sent to the person or their representative to review and approve before payment can be made. Next slide. Support broker employees use, that's incorrect. So invoicing by the quarter hour. So for vendors, this is how support broker vendors should be invoicing by the quarter hour. They would add the total number of minutes worked each day for a person, and then round the number of minutes for the time worked for a person using the following table. This table will be available in the support broker guidance, as well as available on our website. So we'll have some examples, but so you want to add the total number of minutes worked for each person and then round those total number of minutes as noted here. Next slide. So here we have a support broker invoice sample. So we have J. Doe working for E. Graham for the billing period of July 2023. So we see on July 10th, the support broker worked 26 minutes at one point and then 30 minutes at another. Adding those together would be 56 minutes, which is rounded up to the hour. On July 15th, the support broker worked for 55 minutes and rounds that up to the hour. And then on July 30th, the person worked for 1 hour, 46 minutes, rounding that to 1.75 hours. And this invoice totals those number of hours to 3.75. Next slide. Now I'd like to review initial orientation and assistance, or what we have historically called support broker startup. Next slide. Up to 15 hours of support broker startup or up to 15 hours of support can be provided to a person before the person's PCP effective date. During support broker startup, brokers can help with initial meetings with the team to create the PCP and self-directed budget sheet, developing human resources or HR materials such as handbooks, evaluation rubrics, pay scales, and job descriptions, developing materials for recruitment and plans for recruitment, and any other support as needed. Now, we will be issuing an FAQ on support broker startup in the next week that will include all of your questions that we see today regarding support broker startup and some clarifications as well. So in the next week, we'll be issuing that. So we may not be able to answer all of your questions today, but we will issue FAQ next week. Next slide. Support broker startup can be provided to new people enrolling in a DDA waiver, such as transitioning youth or people who begin services from the waitlist, and people who are moving from DDA's traditional model to the self-directed services model. Support broker startup will not be provided to people who are self-directing currently and choose to hire a support broker later, and people who are self-directing with a support broker and move to another DDA operated waiver. So if someone moves from the family supports waiver to the community supports waiver and they maintain their support broker, they would not get startup. Next slide. Now we have some resources that are available to you. I am pretty proud of the resources that we have available on the DDA website on the guidance forms and webinars page. So as mentioned earlier today, we have that chart that includes the CCS support broker and administrator roles. That can be really useful, especially in planning. We've got that participant agreement and reasonable and customary rates and wages. And there are plenty of resources regarding individual and family directed goods and services, including the way to request those and a quick guide. So just wanted to note that here, and that self-direction handbook. Next slide. Again, person-specific questions should be directed to the regional office, and here we have those contacts here. Ola in the central region, Jana in the eastern shore, Tia in the southern region, and Tina in the western region. Next slide. And then here are the details for myself and Nick Burton, who are your resources at DDA headquarters. Now, that was a pretty quick run through of our resources and our content. So I'd like to hand it over to Nick to start our question and answer facilitation.
Thanks, Christy. Really nice job on that. We received a few really great questions that I'm going to go ahead and go over. There are some questions that were submitted specific to FMCS, and I would encourage you to follow up with the FMCS and or continue to follow up via the avenues that you have been following up to seek resolution on those. This webinar is specific to the support broker services updates related to the legislation that was passed, but then also updates regarding policy and guidance. So I'm going to start here. Christy, I answered some while you were in presentation mode. So I'm going to go ahead and go over some of those, and then if you have anything to add, let me know, and then we can. I also have some questions that I saved especially for you.
Sounds good.
All right, so the first question we got is, can you explain why the SIP is mentioned when the SIP is not required under self-direction? So you're correct, everyone. The SIP is not required for self-direction. That doesn't mean that the employer or the participant could choose not to use it. They can. They can choose to use it. They can choose to have a SIP. They can require a SIP. They can put one in place. It's an optional tool for people to use at their discretion. The DDA would say that it would be best practice to utilize it. It's a really good tool to outline roles and responsibilities, particularly if you don't have a job description. So again, it is optional, but a person may choose to use it. Christy, did you want to add anything to that?
I'm really excited to share that in the coming months, we will be sharing some additional resources on how to develop job descriptions. So for people who might not be particularly comfortable with the SIP and might feel that they need a different tool, we will be providing some resources to develop those job descriptions, and we will be providing some updates to our participant agreement in that as well. So there will be options for people to use the SIP or to not.
Awesome. Thanks, Christy. All right, the next question that I also provided an answer to, and Christy, I'll look to you to add some information as well. So it says, if the CCS does not allow time for the support broker to schedule or attend, I'm assuming a person-centered plan, can a broker follow up with the participant and team to provide input? And the response I gave is, it is encouraged that the team work together in a collaborative nature at the direction of the person to ensure the person-centered plan is reflective of the person's needs and wants. As a vendor or employee of the participant, you can always follow up with the person to support them, but it's at their discretion. They are either the employee or they've sought the vendor service, but it's their plan, and they get to decide who attends meetings and who does not attend meetings. And that should be at their decision and not influenced by anybody on the team. Christy, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, that's great.
All right. The next question, which is I saved for you, is what background checks are required? Is a national background check required?
Great question. So yeah, we do know that the background check does need to be federal, so it needs to be a national background check. The FMCS agencies can support vendors if they need some help in finding a vendor, but it is up to fundamentally the vendor to choose that background check company to be able to run it.
And is there a difference if you're working with children?
There is. So if you are working for someone who is under the age of 18, you're also required to do a Child Protective Services or CPS check. And the FMCSs can also assist you in making sure that that paperwork is completed correctly and that the results get routed directly to the FMCS.
And Christy, if I'm an employee, the FMCS will help facilitate that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Okay, and if I'm a vendor, they can help provide resources, but the vendor is responsible for that.
Exactly, yeah. If you're a support broker employee, the FMCS will pay for and run your background checks.
And is that new in regards to the differences between vendors and employees in relation to background checks and who pays for them and who facilitates them?
That's a really great question. This is a clarification on guidance that we issued in October regarding the FMCSs. So it's not particularly new, but in the age of self-direction, perhaps yes. But this is some clarification from from guidance from October.
Okay. And we released that guidance in October regarding this requirement.
We did.
Okay, perfect. There was a question, is support broker billing per item or per quarter hour?
Support broker is billing per quarter hour. So you would calculate the number of minutes you work for a person in a day and then round that up or down to the quarter hour.
And is that new, Christy?
It is this, yeah, that is new. Yeah, that is an update and some clarification because I think we've seen support brokers, support broker vendors do a lot of different things. We want to make sure that their billing is uniform across the state.
And when is that new as of?
As the guidance that's issued, so July 19th today.
Okay, so in terms of how support brokers have been billing, they're changing how they're billing now?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a runway for that?
Right, I think that the July invoices should include the quarter hour. It should be based on the quarter hour here. Because they right, support broker vendors haven't issued July invoices yet. But if you're having difficulty, we're happy to work on a person specific. If we need to give a support brokers runway, we're happy to do that. Just let us know. Reach out to me.
Yeah, and Christy, I think what we're going to need to probably do is I want to take this back and have a little bit of a conversation about it internally, and particularly about a runway, so that we can give some specific guidance to people since this is new information.
That's a great point. I do think that most support brokers are doing something similar to this. I'm not worried about most support brokers, but yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great. So we will release some additional information about this either today or tomorrow in regards to the invoicing by the quarter hour. So stay tuned. So let's see, Christy. I think I lost my space. Let's see, there we go. All right. So on your invoice sample is the detailed description of what the support broker does missing from your vendor invoice.
It isn't there. It is not a requirement that the DDA is issuing that a description be included in a support broker invoice. However, people who self-direct their services can require that their support brokers include additional detail on what they did and what items they worked on.
And I think it's important to discuss that there's ongoing conversation about what that looks like in terms of requirements, in terms of best practice, in terms of quality. There's some ongoing conversations around that. But at this time, there is no specific regulation that needs to occur. But again, and to what Christy says, it is up to the person. Okay, let's see. Christy, is it required for support broker vendors to complete a criminal background check annually?
Also a great question that has a similar answer, that right now there is no requirement for those background checks to be completed annually, but there is a broader discussion across the Department of Health on background checks and those requirements. So for right now, it is not a requirement that they be completed annually unless the person requires their vendors and their employees to complete background checks annually.
All right, the next question is, does the startup or support broker get added to the DSA?
Yes, it would be included in the detailed service authorization and added into the budget sheet.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and take this one. The question is, what was the result of the support broker comments regarding the guidance which ended July 7th? So generally what happens is when we receive that feedback, we review it. We also then document essentially a response to the feedback. And then we either incorporate some of that feedback based on whether or not it's applicable or we're going to include it, or in our response, we document the reason that we didn't include it. That then gets shared and posted as to the feedback that we received and what we did with that feedback. And we are currently in the process of reviewing that feedback right now. All right, let's see. So another question about the invoice that you shared, a sample one, is, so does the new invoice replace the previously shared invoice that included what services were provided?
Yes.
And are these sample invoices or required invoices?
So the samples that we have have all of the requirements. So on our slide where we have the support, what a support broker invoice must include, that invoice includes it all. But in our guidance, it will have those details. Again, you'd have those written out again.
But a person can ask that their support broker include details.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then that would be included in the vendor invoice. So the example that includes the description isn't necessarily null and void. It is a sample that can be used if a person requests the person to use that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are paid support brokers allowed for people under the age of 18?
Yeah, yes. Maybe I don't understand the question, but yes, they definitely are allowed for people who self-direct their
So if someone's
services.
15, they could have a support broker?
Mm-hmm.
Great. And if I want to make sure that we have a support broker next year, what should I do?
It's a great question. So the first thing you would do if you don't have one and you want to make sure you have one for the next year is you'd reach out to your coordinator of community service and you would make sure that that service is included in your PCP for the next year. Your CCS can also help you find a support broker. The DDA has a provider directory that is online, and support brokers are listed in that provider directory. So two things. The first is we'll make sure that we get that link to the provider directory to everyone who attended the webinar. And secondly, if you're a support broker who is not on the provider directory and would like to be on it, please email me and I'll connect you with our director of provider relations who can get you on that directory.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So Christy, on slide 16, it says that support brokers can invoice monthly, or it says invoice times at least monthly. Mm-hmm. And there is a person that is saying GTI has sent an email stating that needs to be done bi-weekly. Can you clarify?
I'm not familiar with the email from GT. I do know they pay on a biweekly cycle, but that doesn't mean that support brokers can't invoice monthly. It just means that GT will pay on the biweekly cycle. But support brokers can bill in any increment, but at least monthly.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Christy, is 4 hours for support broker services the max amount that can be requested? Or can support brokers or people request up to 30 hours per month?
That's a great question, and I just want to clarify. So the 4 hours of support broker services is what can be requested in the PCP. So in the detailed service authorization, up to 4 hours can be there, and the funding will be available for those 4 hours or up to 4 hours. But a team can choose to budget at any time up to 30 hours per month of support broker services from cost savings. So they can either put in the budget sheet up to 30 hours per month, or if they don't do that and they'd like to add additional hours later, they can do that in a modification.
Great. So a clarification here, or a clarification request based on somebody who asked a question earlier about participants and support brokers and their role in the plan. The question is, are you saying that participants and the support broker should have a sole agreement in place? No, what I'm saying is that the person is the director of their own plan, of their own services, and who does what for them in alignment with DDA's policies and procedures about roles and responsibilities. So the person makes that decision. The support broker doesn't necessarily make that decision. It's the person. Just like on the team, the person is in charge of their team, and the person makes a decision about what happens on the team. Christy, on the CCS support broker admin roles document, it notates that the support broker can sign timesheets with the participant's written consent. Can you provide a little bit more detail on when this is appropriate or when it might be allowed? And is this new?
Definitely. So this is a new flexibility in the scope of our waiver because of the Self-Directed Act of 2021. So support brokers are now allowed to sign timesheets, and I can't express this more clearly, at the explicit direction of the person. So that would be outlined in the participant agreement. Now, I do understand that that might not be entirely clear right now in the participant agreement, but we will be making that agreement more robust to kind of outline what that might look like. So please look in the next couple of months for that. In the meantime, the support broker can be listed as signing timesheets on the participant agreement if the person and the team deem that that would be appropriate. I think I can think of a few reasons why that might be the case. Happy to go into specific person-specific concerns. If you call me or if you call our regional office, we can talk to you about what may or may not make sense, but it does need to be at the direction of the person. I cannot express that enough. So if the person feels like that's what they want from their broker, they can absolutely have that. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Would then, if the person does want the support broker to sign off on timesheets, does that mean they get to sign off on their own too?
Oh, absolutely not. Support brokers would never be allowed to sign off on their own invoices or timesheets.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a person who just says, we switched my child's plan to self-direction, and the CCS indicated it was required that I have a support broker as of July 2023. Is that true? And when is a support broker required?
Sure. A support broker is required for anyone who hires a relative, a legally responsible person, a representative payee, or their guardian. In those cases, it will be required. We do want to give people runway, so we are giving people until their next annual plan date or until July 1st, 2024, whichever is later, but it will be required for those people. So if that is how you identify, if you're a person who self-directs and you have hired a family member, then you will definitely need a support broker. And as soon as you can work to make sure that happens, the better the team will be, from my perspective. So that is, I imagine, where your CCS was coming from when they indicated that. We're just trying to give people runway.
Great. Christy, whose responsibility is it to ensure the self-directed budget is completed correctly based on the participants' requests and properly shared with the FMCS?
Yeah, the self-directed budget sheet is a team responsibility. So it should be, best practice would be for it to be completed by the team and submitted by a team member. I will note that support brokers should not be directly submitting budgets or budget modifications, nor should anyone who is being paid from the budget. So it should be someone in the team who is not getting paid from the budget. So usually that would be the CCS or a family member, but that's the submission of it. But the whole team is responsible for ensuring it's completed correctly. And then the FMCS reviews it.
Great. And I'm just going to add to that, that's part of the person-centered planning process. That's part of the role of a coordinator of community services to make sure that the team is working on that together and that it's at the direction of the person and that it's getting complete and submitted in the time frame necessary to access the supports and services. Okay, let's see here. If a support broker is also a direct support for another individual, can they use the background check they already conducted for support broker services with this new person?
If a support broker vendor is also a direct support person for another individual, can they use the background check? Okay, so I think I'm reading it two different ways. So I'll say this: if you're a vendor, you may not have, and you're a vendor and a DSP, you may not have access to the results of your background check from being a DSP with an FMCS. If you do, if you have access to those results, then you can use it as a vendor. Yeah, but I will say, if you are a DSP, the FMCS has to run your background. So if you are a vendor and then become a DSP, you will need to have your background check rerun by the FMCS. But if you're a DSP and want to be a support broker vendor, you can take the results from your FMCS background check and use that if you have access to them. I'm not certain you would. I hope that makes sense.
And if there's people that have questions specific about background checks, who should they ask?
Yeah, if they have questions about background checks, they should reach out to the FMCS first, and you can include me, and I'm happy to be involved if needed.
And can you remind people how frequently background checks for vendors need to be done?
As frequently as the person desires. Right now, there is no requirement for additional background checks after the first is submitted unless the person requires it. But again, the Department of Health is reviewing that policy and may update it in the future.
So on your invoice, do you have to show the math, or can you round to the quarter hour?
There is no requirement for showing the math on the invoice. However, you might decide you want to be accessible to the people you support, and the people you support might require it. But it is not required to show the math.
Great. Let's see. Christy, you had mentioned that there's a chart on the DDA website that specifies roles and responsibilities for support brokers, CCS, and staff day-to-day administrators. Where is that specifically on our website?
Definitely. So it is linked in this PowerPoint presentation twice. So it is linked early on as the direct document, but then in the resources part of this this PowerPoint, there is a link for the forms, guidance forms and webinars page of our DDA website, and that is where it is housed.
Christy, did this person hear correctly that first aid and CPR needs to be in person? And is that a requirement for all employees vendors?
That's a great question. So yes, so let me be clear. If a vendor or an employee currently holds first aid and CPR certifications, it can be used until it is expired. Once those certifications become expired, you must replace, both vendors and employees must replace their first aid and CPR with in-person first aid and CPR or a hybrid model that includes that hands-on. And that is directly noted in a memo that was issued maybe 2 weeks ago. And additional information will be included in the support broker guidance regarding this.
And to add, Christy, it was also included in last week's DDA newsletter.
Definitely.
You can also go take a look at it there. And are all employees and support workers required to have first aid CPR?
Yes. It's a waiver requirement.
So slide 12 says, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one. Slide 12 says that support workers should attend PCP meetings and receive paperwork. That is contradictory to what you said about the participant being able to select to attend meetings. So support brokers are not required to attend. Also, participants do not need to share the PCP and budget with the support broker. It's not actually contradictory. There's a difference between should and required. What we're saying, and this is how the model in which our system is built, is that it's a person-driven system. So a person, regardless of whether they're self-directing or regardless of whether they are in the traditional services, gets to choose who participates in their person-centered planning. What DDA is saying is that support brokers, if a person has a support broker, they absolutely should be there. They should. But again, the person gets to make that decision. Now, let's say you're a support broker or you're a provider or you're an employee or whomever. If that person is not wanting you at their meeting or doesn't want you to receive information, that's a really good time for the CCS to have a conversation about why not? What's going on? What happened? Is there something that you want to discuss? It's also a good opportunity for you to have a conversation with your employer or the person who is choosing to receive your vendor services. So I want to be careful on the distinction between should and must, or should and shall. We absolutely believe that support brokers should be there, just like we believe providers should be there too. But in a person-driven system and in conjunction with DDA's mission and our vision, we want people to make sure that they have that choice. Christy, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's great.
All right, there's some questions about the initial support or the onboarding support that I'm going to save for our FAQ that we're going to submit. So we're going to take those questions and we're not going to necessarily answer them here, but we will make sure that we get answers to them and share them with you all within the next week or so. Will the slides be available on the DDA website?
Yes.
Donna, okay, Christy, great.
Yeah, I think there might be some typos that I need to update in this slide deck that I saw, so we'll do that and get it uploaded.
You know, Christy, I think this question came up before, and it's okay if we need to go back and kind of look here, but it says, can a support broker live out of state and attend meetings virtually?
That's a good question. I agree. I think we need to look into that further. I would be curious to know if people are currently doing that. Because from my perspective, I am a former support broker, and from my perspective, there is something really unique about being physically in the same space as people when you provide this really unique service. So I'd be curious to know what other people's experiences are.
Great. Christy, for support broker invoicing, it was mentioned that the support broker needs to sign the invoice. Does the employer also need to review and sign the invoice?
Oh, definitely, right. So in order to be paid, invoices must be reviewed by the person or their representative. That has not changed at all.
Great.
Mhm.
How about once it's signed by the person, who can submit it? Can a support broker submit the invoice?
They can, if the person would like them to. I don't love that. I wouldn't do that, but if that's what people need, definitely. And I think teams can work to make sure that invoices are being submitted in the best way possible for that team. But yes.
Great.
hmm
If we're already self-directing, but we didn't choose to add support broker services, are we now able to choose them and use the 15 startup hours?
You would not be able to if you wouldn't be able to necessarily. You could move funding from cost savings to have up to 30 hours of support broker at any time using cost savings. And if that is keeping you from having a support broker, please reach out to your regional office and to me, and we can look and see if we can support you. But that 15 hours is specifically for people who are coming into the waiver or as a transitioning youth or from the traditional model.
So Christy, is there a minimum amount of support broker services or billing when a participant who's required to hire a support broker hires a support broker but doesn't want the support broker?
So I really look forward to having this conversation over the next few months, because I do believe that support brokers provide an immense level of support for people they work for. I believe in the service. I think people are better for it most often. So there is no minimum requirement for support brokers who are required to be in teams, though I do have a hunch that as people are hiring those support brokers and they get more involved, they'll be more likely to use that support more than they maybe even initially anticipated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to back up, Christy, what you said. I think that, this is why we have a runway for this, right? We want people to have conversations. We want people to feel comfortable. We want people to make sure that they see the benefit of a support broker as a member of the team to support them with what they're doing. So, I think it's going to be really important, and particularly for the CCS that are on the call, how do you help facilitate and foster those relationships, right? As a coordinator of community services and the requirement to bring a support worker on, how is the CCS, can you work with the person and their family to really facilitate? I think that's going to be really important as we move forward. Christy, are there any restrictions as to who can receive more than 4 hours a month of support broker services? Or can just anyone request it for any reason?
So this right. So more than 4, meaning up to 30, right? Up to 30 hours of support broker services can be budgeted for anyone at any time for any reason, and that can be done either in the budget sheet or in a budget modification, and that is perfectly allowable. For more than 4 hours in the detailed service authorization, then we would need to review that need. But up to 30 in the budget, no problem.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Christy, if somebody is really excited to email you and chat with you, where can they find your email address?
Oh, and this in the deck. Donna, can you move back one to the headquarters slide?
Slide 25.
Yeah, there it is right there. My name is Christy. Yeah. My name is Christy, but if you email christy.culbreth@maryland.gov, you will get it pushed back. So my mom really wanted me to be called Christina, so christina.culbreth@maryland.gov.
And you don't need to call me Nicholas, but you will have to put Nicholas in there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why my mom named me Nicholas, but I go by Nick. All right. So another question, Christy. It looks like somebody's started providing support broker services in March 2020. And the ARC had received a clear background check, which is on file. Is another one done and needed, or is this person good?
No, they're good to go unless the people they support would like them to conduct additional background checks.
Okay. Can the support broker authorize overtime and fire staff?
Yeah, those are employer responsibilities that support brokers can absolutely be involved in, but not make those decisions. Support brokers don't make those decisions for people.
But they can support a person when thinking about those decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Up to and including helping draft new hire letters, or being in the meeting, or being on the call where someone is terminated. Support brokers can be with people every step of the way, but the decision is the person's and should be done at the direction of the person.
So Christy, and if you don't have the exact definition here, that's okay. We can include it in the FAQ. Ooh. But is a relative just a parent or sibling or any family member?
Got the waiver up. Let me pull it in.
And just so everyone knows, this will also be in the FAQ, but it will also be in the policy, the support broker policy that will be released. There will be an actual definition of what relative is based on our waiver, and then just based on our policy procedures, that kind of stuff.
I'll keep looking through. We can go to another question and I'll come back to it with an answer.
So there was a question here that's interesting. So a family hired a support broker as a 7-1, but they don't want one, and they only hired it because of the requirement. Can they fire the support broker until 7/1/2024?
Go ahead.
I would say that's not a great idea. Certainly employers can make decisions that they would like, but I would encourage the team to have a conversation here, and I would encourage there to be an open dialogue, and I would reach out to the CCS to help facilitate an open dialogue. Okay.
I have a definition for relative.
Oh, great. Okay.
For the purposes of our waivers, a relative is defined as a natural or adoptive parent, step-parent, child, stepchild, or sibling who is not also a legal guardian or legally responsible person. And we'll make sure we get that in the FAQ and in our guidance.
Can the day-to-day admin also help with the participant in approving time?
That's a great question. As listed, day-to-day administrators cannot approve time for people. It is solely a task that a support broker could do at the direction of the person.
All right. With the new updates and requirements, is there a list of what's needed to be on file with the FMCS, and who would share that information?
Yeah, for support brokers, we have that listed in our guidance that will go out. So it will have the list of qualifications for support broker in order to be paid.
There's a question here about, can the support broker be added back to the budget mod form since they are following the expenditures for the person?
Yeah, so we do believe that budget modifications, best practice is for those to be completed by the team, and support brokers can absolutely help and facilitate that conversation and be involved in developing the budget modification. But we want to make sure that budget modifications are quickly processed, and so we wouldn't want support brokers to have to sign off on a modification in order for it to be submitted. Now, I don't know if that's the question or not, but I would also say we can bolster kind of our guidance on modifications to say that if a support broker is involved in a team, that they be included, that it's best practice to include them in the email submission. I can see how that would get frustrating for support brokers to not have access to submitted mods, but we want to make sure that everything is done at the direction of the person too. So we can add some language on best practice in our modification guidance.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Christy, you mentioned that the team is responsible for getting the budget submitted to the FNCS. However, the only person on the team that has access to LTSS is the CCS. So would the CCS actually be responsible for submitting the budget?
Yeah, the CCS is definitely responsible for uploading the budget into LTSS Maryland and client attachments. But the budget can also be submitted via email by any member of the team. That's not the support broker or someone being paid.
Okay, I think we are at time. We've got some more questions that we will certainly answer in the FAQ and make sure that those get out. But I really appreciate all the really wonderful questions. I appreciate the amount of you that came here. I'm excited for the guidance that's going to go out, as well as the support broker policy. And I also just want to really quickly thank all of the support brokers. I know that you are doing a wonderfully valuable service to people. And I know people really depend upon your supports. And I really enjoy the opportunity that we get to collaborate to make sure that people are receiving the best quality of services that they can, and that they're in the driver's seat of those services. So I really do appreciate all of you.
Okay.
All right, Christy, any closing words from you?
Oh, that's great. No, I can only reiterate, support brokers are really the backbone of self-directed services in our state. I'm really thankful for all of you. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.